Hey guys, I hope you're all doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. In this video, it's all about military encounters, and some of them are pretty crazy, so use your discretion there. But if you're ready for it, then pull up a stump and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. So my uncle was in the military in my country, and for 10 years, from 1976 to 86, he worked at a chemical depot. Routinely, he would be out on patrol in the dry fields of Pueblo, just making sure that nothing got close to the decommissioning areas where they were deactivating mustard gas and other chemical weapons. It was the late shift, around 2 a.m., May 14th, 1984. He was making the rounds on the perimeter when he notices that the barbed wire has been ripped. Not cut, but ripped out of the wooden fence posts on the far end of the decommissioning area. There were splinters of wood everywhere, and the wire had been severed near the post. He radios in that the fence has been tampered with. He's told to just investigate for any tracks. He doesn't find much of anything, but there were trodden weeds and dry grass leading toward the silos. He hops back in his Jeep. His sidearm is now placed on the passenger seat as he drives along the dirt roads, heading toward the silo area. The silos were climate-controlled and sealed with those advanced locks only unlockable by some weird key. One of the doors was open. My uncle immediately gets a jolt of fear. This is not supposed to happen. My uncle walks toward the silo door, the dead air slowly creeping out as he could smell something awful from within. What he sees is something hunched over, opening the valves on the containers of mustard gas and sucking it out. He doesn't even say anything. All my uncle said was that the only thing on his mind was killing it. He leveled his firearm and fired off 4 shots into the thing's back before calling in a breach. Within minutes, a hazmat crew is out of the silo, and he is told to go home for the night. He was never given any further information, nor told what it was that he saw. At a different time, it was the early morning shift, probably about 5 to 6 a.m. at the depot. My uncle was finishing the prior graveyard shift for the night, and he was ready to head home when he sees this large, strange human figure off by one of the large upright containers. I forget what he called them. He radios it in. He's told to go check it out. This was too early for the morning shift of decontamination crews to be out by the tanks, so this was, again, not supposed to happen. He drives closer. This was before his night shift on May 14th, which would be his last graveyard shift before switching to decom. The large man seems to just be standing there, shaking in the cold, damp morning air of the spring. My uncle's only about 200 yards from this thing now, and that's when it turned toward him. Then, it began to sprint back into the open fields, its arms flailing as it moved, as if they had no musculature in them at all. He radioed it in, and after a moment of silence, they said that it must have been his imagination, that he must be tired, and that he should come in to clock off for the night. So I'm not really any kind of storyteller, but this is something unsettling that happened to me when I was in the army, and I never got any resolution for it. It still kind of bugs me. So, it's the early 2000s. Again, I was in the army. I was on some kind of top secret clearance plus job. I get attached to these weird missions all the time as one-offs. So a lot of times in Afghanistan, I would get attached to units who helicopter in, go to a compound at night. The shooter guys are doing their thing. I go in and I check out the building for booby traps and evidence. One time, I get a call to be attached to an FTF, Focused Target Force. The military likes to make up silly names like this for some reason. Basically, conventional infantry guys who get slotted in for some extra training, and they act as baby door kickers for missions that like Rangers or the SOF or whoever don't have time to do. So it was a pretty normal pre-mission. But some DoD civilians were also attached. Everyone thinks that PMCs are some kind of spooky people, but they're mostly kind of just normal. The real spooky is the DoD civilians, former special whatever operators, decked out in cool guy gear. We were told that they were there to observe and make recommendations, which, translation, they had stuff to do that we weren't read on to know about. So the mission happens as normal. The FTF guys go into a falling apart qualot, a house compound that's clearly not lived in. This would be something that insurgents use as a drop-off point. So one insurgent is there, and he gets shot. I do my BDA. I check the body for booby traps, and I start collecting intel items. This guy has a red US passport on him. Red passports are for official US government personnel, and a small notebook. I flip through it, and it's in English, not anything local. There's lots of numbers, like NSN looking, with occasional written comments in the margins. I bag everything. Back at the base, a DoD guy comes in and takes the passport, notebook, and SD card out of my evidence camera, and after that, I never hear any more about it. So, I never got any resolution onto who that guy was. So my granddad told me a strange or funny story about something that happened to him in Vietnam. Some details I can't recall, but I'll try. So my granddad was with his squad. They were traipsing through the jungle fighting Viet Congs. This one night, it starts to get dark, so they set up camp for the night. As dawn breaks, somebody spots movement 100 yards away. My granddad and his squad shoot a brick and they find cover. It looks like a 10-man team in single file coming toward them, cutting through the brush. They all have machetes, it looks like. The squad decides not to engage, but stay in cover. The strangers get closer. Apparently, they seem to be on patrol. They get to within a few yards, and he thinks, oh, this is it. It was then that my granddad and the rest of the squad realized it wasn't people. It was a group of monkeys, armed with sticks. They were on patrol, apparently. As the squad watched on, he said that the monkeys kept formation, single file, and acted almost human. Their behavior was very intelligent. He wasn't sure if the monkeys were looking for soldiers or for food, but the squad thought it was better that they just stay hidden and wait for them to pass. The way he told it was better, but the thought of a line of chimps just patrolling with sticks always makes me smile. It must have been surreal for him to see. Back when I was deployed in Afghanistan, we were sent on another BS recovery mission. I don't remember the original intention, but it was something about abandoned munitions in a small town. We are sent to confirm how much is there and what condition it's in, so it can be airlifted out. We get dropped off a little more than halfway there, and we have to fast march the rest of the way. We arrive at 0600, and the whole town is abandoned. DBs are scattered, and there's some in the houses. I was told to take Herbie, Dan, and some guy we call Dickhead and search those houses on the north end. So the first few have nothing eventful at all, but the second to last one, before we got in, we heard noises, so we prep for a breach. Lucky me, I was on point, again. Someone mentions how it's actually barred from the outside, and I think, well, I have charges, so I got this. So we breach, we clear the left and clear the right, and then, right in front of us, oh my god, There was red Sanskrit all over the walls. There was loud noises, like somebody was whimpering loudly. There are two human-esque objects in the far corner of the room. I yell, "Contact, front." It's just some guy crying in the corner with blood all over his face. He's clutching onto something black for dear life. The figure next to him is covered in a black robe. The robe looked like a burqa. Logic dictates that this was a woman. The guy is crying and chanting something and squinting because he now has 4 flashlights on him. I ask Herbie, what is he saying? He says it sounds like he's praying. I said, tell him to stand up. We have to search them. Herbie is our translator, in case you didn't catch that. He says he can't stand up. His legs are gone. Somehow, in the commotion, none of us noticed that the man had no legs. They looked like they had been chewed off. We quietly panic. I said, Herbie, ask him what the hell's going on. Herbie just says he won't answer me anymore. He keeps praying for forgiveness. My initial thought was that this man had done something and was left here to die, and that there are explosives on him, and this whole thing was a trap. I tell Dan to go search him. He searches the man. He says he's clean, but the praying gets louder. He sounds more irritated. Dan reaches down for the woman, and she starts moaning like a wildebeest. Dan backs up and draws to fire. I look at Herbie and I say, you're going to have to tell her to take off the burqa and put her hands up. At this point, the situation seems to have gone much further than any of us could have foreseen, so cultural respect was kind of out the window. But as soon as Herbie tells her to take off the burqa, the man starts freaking out, trying to move away, and it's then that we notice most of his back is gone. I can see bone, blood, and muscle. I yell out, "What the F?" and I raise my weapon. The next part is kind of fuzzy, since at this point, everyone's freaking out a little and yelling. Herbie is yelling at the woman. The guy is yelling at somebody. Dan and the guy we call Dickhead are yelling at me, asking me what to do. The woman just starts shrieking and groaning, some sort of inhuman, tortured soul kind of noises. The man begins screaming too, absolutely losing his cookies. He starts smashing his head again and again on the wall. We watch in disbelief as this man basically kills himself and smashes his brain into pudding, and then all noise stops. It feels like forever that this goes on, just dead silence. And then all of a sudden, the thing starts screaming loudly. It stands up. It was not a burqa. It was just a very large black cloth. It's very tall, almost over 7 feet by the looks of it. I can see its arms and legs. Dark brown wrinkled skin, very long nails, yellowish blemishes scattered all over the arms and legs. I was too scared to move or think. The noise is so loud it's hurting my head and making me cut my ears. It backs up to the wall and somehow crawls 7 feet of its terrifying ass up into a hole roughly the size of a football, ass first. The only thing I can compare it to is that it looked like a giant spider being sucked into a vacuum a quarter of its size, all while wearing a blanket. Dan fires 2 rounds up into the hole. I'm too shocked to say anything, just standing there with a stupid look on my face. My radio lights up. What the hell's going on in there? We heard shots fired. We tell them nothing, that we have it under control. After coming down from shock, we quickly discuss just what in the F happened and what to say to everyone else. We decide not to look crazy. We cover it up. We cover the man with a rug and try to wipe off the red lettering that was discovered on the wall. It was later found out to be blood. We report back for an ass chewing On why we radioed we were breaching a building, but not reporting any conflict that needed firing. The four of us talked a few times more about it, how it was so weird that nobody else seemed to hear the screams or saw anything running away. I never went back to that base after I left on leave. I was transferred and debriefed on the situation. My guess is that someone involved talked. No matter how bad I wanted to tell the shrink at the base about it, I didn't want to be prescribed crazy pills. I already have some for PTSD that I don't take like I should. I know what I saw. We all did. And I'll never forget it. By the time I was 23, I was an E4 in the army. I was on my first deployment, and I was all amped up to go do soldier stuff. We flew through Germany and then into Bagram, Afghanistan. It was a pretty boring week, to be honest, getting everything set up for our out-hop flights to our outstation assignments. So we fly to Kabul, and then to some tiny outpost in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. The closest village was Azro. I was tasked with maintaining patrols and security to ensure that terrorist traffic from Pakistan was minimized. It was mainly just about limiting freedom of movement and all that stuff. So patrol was in the hot mountains in very thin air, with 3-day assault packs and the whole squad, day in, day out. And then we started hearing rumors of some kind of animals in the mountains, supposedly some kind of cat or something. At the time, I disregarded it. I didn't believe it at all. To me, Afghanistan was just piles of rocks and stuff. Eventually, we switched to night shifts, and we repeat. After a few months, we have a firefight with some people trying to get the drop on us in the middle of the night. This thing lasts for like 3 hours. Trees and large rocks make it very hard to see enemies, even with NVGs. There's lots of yelling, shooting, and stress. Now finally, it eventually stops. We think we got them all, so we check everyone to be sure that nobody got hit and didn't realize it somehow. Everyone's good, so the squad stops security and heads to make sure that everything's actually cleared up. I radio in to the outstanding and let them know that we're good and what our plan is. We get the green light and we're told to check every hour to give spot reps until we verified security. As we get closer, we start to hear a death rattle of a select few who haven't quite died yet, but they're close. They're going to. We identify and secure. They don't have any weapons on them anymore. They're not a threat. We begin to pull security on our position as we think that we've got them all identified and secured. That's when our DM notices a blood trail leading up the mountain away from the group of bodies. There's lots of rocks disturbed and earth and lots of blood. A lot. We split into 2 teams. One goes up the hill. Mine pulls security on the corpses. 20 minutes later, we hear running, shout out the challenge, and in return, we get a frantic, out-of-breath scream of the password, back 4 or 5 times right in a row. Johnson and Smith. They're both covered in blood. There's no way it's theirs, but the rest of their team is gone, and so are their weapons. We start drilling them and trying to get Smith to stop stuttering. Johnson isn't really saying much of anything. He's just staring blankly into the distance, mumbling about cats. We're trying to figure out just what the hell happened. RTO is already on it, and calling back to the outstation, requesting that we get somebody to put some eyes on the AO, predict feed, or something. We need to know what the hell they ran into. The outstation says that they're working on it. They say that they're sending out another squad to assist. They say it's going to be at least 2 hours, because there's no way that they're getting a vehicle near us. The terrain is too shitty. Finally, Smith stops stuttering and just starts screaming.
One of the other guys slaps a hand over his mouth. You can still hear him screaming through his nose. Johnson gets loud enough and stops muttering so we can hear him. Apparently, they were following a blood trail and came up on a pile of dismembered bodies. They were busy being absolutely mind-effed at the site when Johnson and Smith noticed that the rest of their team was gone. They ready up their weapons and start trying to locate their team, whisper yelling through their teeth. Out of nowhere, they get knocked over by a torso and a leg. They look to their left, where it came from, and they see this big-ass thing that looks kind of like a cat that's dismembering somebody else, and there are several bodies next to it. The thing has these huge human-like hands with short, hooked claws. They panic and just bolt. Smith looks down and says, "Where's my weapon?" The dude didn't even realize he had lost it until just that moment. The second squad shows up after hours. We head out to where the carnage is supposed to be, but nobody can find anything, save for Smith's weapon and the ACH of one of the missing team members, and what looks like torn up earth, like how dry earth gets after a dog marks its territory and then scratches the ground. The next few weeks were weird. We never found the bodies. We never saw this cat thing that Smith and Johnson talked about. We never found any of the missing weapons. Nothing. The only trace of it even happening was their debrief, their blood-soaked uniforms, and the helmet from one of the MIA guys. Sometimes I wonder if it was all in our heads, like some sort of mass hallucination because of the humidity in the thin air, that they saw something just too screwed up and couldn't process it and replaced it with a monster. I hope I never know, though. If it's anything like what they actually said, I never want to know what really happened. So, those were pretty crazy, weren't they? If you have a story of your own that you would like to send in to the channel, I have an email in the description below. And also down in the description is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And here on YouTube there is super thanks. And, of course, just watching the video, liking and subscribing and commenting is good for the channel too. And with that, I think I will see you in the next one. I hope you have a good week, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Oh, and thank you for pulling up a stump, as always.